Rome did not kill her. That would have been a sin against the gods. Instead, they gave her a home, a stone chamber, 12 feet beneath the earth. Inside, they placed a single loaf of bread, a pitcher of water, a flask of milk, and a lit oil lamp, not to sustain her life, but so the empire could look the gods in the eye and say, "We did not shed her blood. She is simply resting." The journey to that resting place did not happen in a cart, nor was she dragged through the streets like a common thief. That would have been too human, too ordinary. Instead, the state wrapped her in a silence so dense it felt like physical weight. She was placed inside a covered litter, a wooden box veiled in heavy curtains and leather, designed to shield the city from the pollution of her presence. Inside that stifling darkness, the air was hot and tasted of recycled fear. Her wrists were not manacled with iron, which might bruise the sacred flesh, but bound tight with strips of rawhide, soaked in water, so they would shrink as they dried, biting into the skin without breaking it. Every step the bearers took sent a sickening sway through the litter, a rhythmic lurching that churned the stomach. But she could not cry out. Gagged? No, the law did not require a gag. She was bound by something stronger, the terrified paralysis of a woman who knows that every sound she makes is an affront to the gods she served for 30 years. Outside, the usual roar of Rome, the vendors, the arguments, the clatter of wagon wheels, had vanished. In its place was a hush that rippled outward from the procession like a shockwave. Thousands of citizens lined the Via Salaria, pressed shoulder to shoulder, yet not one of them spoke. No jeers, no rotten fruit, just the wet slap of sandals on paving stones and the heavy, synchronized breathing of the lictors, marching alongside. They were moving toward the Servian wall, specifically toward the Porta Collina. Beyond that gate lay a stretch of land that nothing grew on. The birds avoided it. The stray dogs gave it a wide berth. The Romans called it the Campus Sceleratus, the evil field. It was a place that existed on the map, but not in the moral geography of the city. To step there was to step out of civilization. Inside the swaying box, Cornelia could likely feel the change in the incline as the road rose toward the gate. She would hear the echo of footsteps, changing from the open street to the confined reverberation of the gate's archway. The temperature would drop slightly in the shadow of the great wall, and then the movement stopped. The litter was lowered, not with the gentle care of arrival, but with the finality of a cargo delivery. The leather curtains were pulled back, and the sudden assault of the afternoon sun would have been blinding. But no one looked her in the eye. The executioner turned his face away. The priest stared at the ground. To look at her now was to risk infection by her curse. She was already a ghost. She just hadn't stopped breathing yet. The air here smelled different. It lacked the scent of cooking fires and perfume that permeated the forum. Here, it smelled of dry dust and turned earth. Right in front of her, cut into the ground like a surgical wound, was the opening. A small square of darkness in the bright Italian afternoon. A wooden ladder protruded from it, the top rungs worn smooth by the hands of the gravediggers who had prepared the chamber. This was the mouth of the beast, and she was expected to walk into it willingly. The straps were undone. Her limbs, numb from the confinement, tingled with the rush of returning blood, a cruel reminder that her body still wanted to survive. She stood on the edge of the pit, the wind catching the rough grey funeral dress they had forced her into, stripping away the white robes of her office. The silence of the crowd stretched so tight, it felt as if the sky itself might crack. They were waiting, not for a speech, not for a plea. They were waiting to see if the rumours were true. If she was innocent, surely Vesta would save her. If she was guilty, the earth would swallow her. But you, standing there at the edge of history, you know something the crowd doesn't. You know who signed the death warrant. Before she takes that final step, the gavel is in your hands. Cornelia stands accused of incestum, breaking her vow of chastity. But her accuser is Emperor Domitian, a man openly sleeping with his own niece. So look at her standing on the precipice and tell me, is this execution, A, divine justice from a pious leader? Or is it, B, a political murder to hide his own sins? Pause the audio. Cast your vote in the comments right now. Justice or murder? History has judged her, but right now, you are the Senate. To understand why the silence of the crowd is so deafening, you must first understand what is being destroyed. This woman standing in the dust is not merely a citizen. She is not even a queen. She is something far more dangerous and far more vital. For 30 years, Cornelia has been a Vestal. From the age of 6, when she was taken from her father's house, she ceased to belong to a family and began to belong to Rome itself. She became a Vestal virgin, one of only 6 women in the entire empire entrusted with the eternal flame. This was not a symbolic duty. To the Roman mind, the safety of the city, the strength of the legions, the stability of the walls, the fertility of the crops, was physically tied to that fire, and by extension, to the purity of the women who tended it. She was the metaphysical linchpin of the world. Think of the power she held just days ago. When she walked the streets, the highest magistrates, men who commanded armies and decided the fate of nations, would step aside. The lictors, carrying the fasces, the bundles of rods and axes that symbolized the power of life and death, would lower their weapons in her presence. If a criminal on his way to execution happened to cross her path simply by catching her eye, he was automatically pardoned. Her word in court was accepted without an oath. She was sacrosanct. To touch her with malice was to forfeit your life. Her body was the most protected fortification in the empire. And yet, the law that elevated her so high contained a terrifying clause. Because her body was the walls of Rome, a crack in her chastity was a crack in the city's defense. It was not treated as a moral failing. It was treated as high treason. The crime was called Incestum. Not incest in the modern sense, but a violation of the sacred bond, a pollution of the state itself. Now, watch the dismantling of that divinity. It happened before she arrived at the field, in a ceremony that feels more like a flaying than a legal procedure. The Pontifex Maximus, Domitian himself, playing the role of the high priest, oversaw the stripping. They did not just take her clothes, they took her identity. The vitae, the white woolen fillets that bound her hair and signified her holiness, were untied. These bands had been part of her silhouette for decades, the crown that marked her as untouchable. As they were pulled away, the intricate hairstyle beneath, the semicrines, the 6-braid style of the Roman bride, was exposed, only to be shorn. They cut her hair, the same hair that had been ceremonially dressed every morning for 30 years. It is a specific type of violence to take a woman who has been defined by elaborate, sacred rituals and reduce her to a rough, shorn head. Then came the removal of the infulae, the veil. When that white fabric was lifted, the protection of the goddess Vesta was officially revoked. She was no longer a Vestal. She was just a body, a corpus. They replaced the blinding white robes of her office with a tunic of drab, funeral grey. It is rough against the skin, unwashed, the colour of ash. This is the garment of the non-person. By changing her clothes, they are rewriting her existence before she is even dead. The woman standing at the ladder is a paradox. She is a person who has been legally erased, yet physically persists. And that persistence is the problem. Rome cannot simply execute her because the law forbids shedding the blood of a Vestal. To cut her throat would be to splash sacred blood on the profane ground, incurring the wrath of the Furies. So they found a loophole, a bureaucratic masterpiece of cruelty. They will not kill her. They will simply place her in a room, give her the necessities of life, and let nature take its course. It is the ultimate washing of hands. As she stands there, stripped of her ribbons, her veil, and her name, she looks small. The wind whips the grey tunic around her legs. The majesty is gone. All that remains is the trembling biology of a human being about to be discarded. Turn your eyes now from the woman in the dust to the man sitting on the curule chair. He watches the proceedings with a detached, almost bored intensity. This is Emperor Domitian. But today, he is not wearing the purple of the emperor. He is wearing the robes of the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome. He has a flushed face, eyes that seem too large for his head, and a thinning hairline that he is notoriously sensitive about. He sits there as the arbiter of morality, the guardian of Roman virtue. He has even taken a title that no emperor before him dared to claim permanently: Censor Perpetuus, the eternal censor, the man who watches everyone, the man who judges the private lives of every citizen in the empire. But peel back the robes, and you find a rot so deep it infested the very foundations of the Palatine Hill. While he condemns Cornelia for a crime of unchastity based on flimsy evidence, rumours of a man seen near her quarters, a garment adjusted too loosely. Domitian himself is living a nightmare of sexual corruption. The Senate whispers, though never loud enough to be heard, about his niece, Julia Flavia, the daughter of his own brother, Titus. Domitian didn't just have an affair with her, he consumed her. He forced her husband to divorce her so he could move her into the palace. He lived with her in open incest while his own wife was exiled. And when Julia became pregnant with his child, the guardian of morals forced her to undergo a botched abortion that killed her. This is the man who signed Cornelia's death warrant. Why? Why dig up an ancient, terrifying punishment like live burial, which hadn't been used in years? Because Rome was failing. There were military setbacks on the Danube. The economy was wobbling. The gods seemed angry. And when the gods are angry, a tyrant needs a scapegoat. A Vestal virgin is the perfect target. If the legions lose a battle, it must be because the sacred fire is polluted. If the fire is polluted, it must be because a woman failed. By burying Cornelia, Domitian isn't just punishing a crime. He is performing a theatrical exorcism. He is washing his own sins in the imaginary guilt of a woman who cannot speak to defend herself. The trial itself was a farce conducted in the Alban villa, Domitian's private retreat in the hills, far from the prying eyes of the Roman public. There were no defense attorneys allowed. Cornelia wasn't even permitted to be present for much of the hearing. The other priests, the lesser pontiffs, sat in terror. They knew that to vote against Domitian was to invite their own destruction. They had seen what happened to the senators who opposed him, exiled, executed, their property seized. So when Domitian asked for the verdict, they nodded. They signed the paper that condemned a sister to the dark. They chose their own survival over the truth. And Cornelia knows this. As she stands near the ladder, she isn't just a victim of religious law. She's a casualty of political theatre. She raised her hands to the heavens earlier, invoking Vesta, invoking the gods to witness her innocence. But she knows that the gods are not in attendance today. Only Domitian is here. And he needs a body to bury, so the people will forget about the body of the niece he destroyed. It is the oldest trick of power. Purify the state by sacrificing the powerless. The irony is suffocating. The most unchaste man in Rome is sentencing the most chaste woman in Rome to death for unchastity. He watches her now, his face unreadable, perhaps checking the sun to see how long this will take. He has a dinner to attend later. The suffering of a woman is just an item on the agenda, sandwiched between a meeting about grain supplies and a gladiator show. The lictor strikes the ground with his rod. The sound cracks through the heat like a whip. It is the signal. The time for theatre is over. The time for erasing has begun. Cornelia turns her back on the emperor, on the forum, on the sun itself. She faces the Porticolina, the massive gate of rough-hewn stone that marks the boundary of the city she protected. But she is not walking through the gate. She is walking into the shadow of the earthen rampart beside it. There, the ground opens up. The pit is not merely a hole. It is a meticulously constructed mouth. The shaft is square, lined with dressed stone, descending 12 feet into the suffocating dark. A crude wooden ladder leans against the lip, its rungs stained with the clay of the underworld. It looks flimsy against the permanence of the stone walls, a temporary bridge between the realm of the living and the domain of the forgotten. She approaches the ladder. Her movements are slow, not from hesitation, but from a terrifying, controlled grace. She is moving at the speed of a ritual. She places a hand on the side of the ladder. The wood is rough, splintered, warm from the sun. This is the last thing of the surface world she will ever touch. She places a sandaled foot on the first rung. The wood groans under her weight. She begins to descend. One step. Her head sinks below the level of the horizon. 2 steps. She is now cut off from the view of the 7 hills. 3 steps. The crowd holds its breath. And then it happens. A moment so small, so seemingly insignificant, that it should have been lost to history. But Pliny the Younger, the great chronicler, saw it. He wrote it down. It is the detail that breaks the heart. As she descends, the rough fabric of her funeral tunic, that grey, shapeless sack they forced her into, snags on a splinter of the ladder, or perhaps a rough edge of the stone wall. It pulls tight. A lesser woman, a guilty woman, a woman consumed by the terror of imminent death, would have ignored it. She would have stumbled, ripped the cloth, or collapsed in tears. But Cornelia stops. She pauses on the rung, suspended between the sky and the grave. With a deliberation that echoes through the centuries, she turns. She reaches out with a steady hand. She carefully, precisely, unhooks the fabric from the snag. She smooths the folds of the dress down over her legs. Do you understand what you are seeing? In the face of annihilation, she is tending to her dignity. She is refusing to enter the afterlife disheveled. It is an act of defiance so quiet it screams. It says, "You can take my life, you can take my name, but you cannot take my discipline. I am a Vestal. I do not stumble. I do not tear. I am order amidst your chaos." The executioner, standing at the lip of the hole, misunderstands. He thinks she is faltering. He thinks the fear has finally seized her muscles. He reaches down, extending a dirty, calloused hand to help her, to guide her down the final steps. It is a reflex of the living toward the dying. But as his shadow falls over her, Cornelia recoils. She shrinks back against the cold stone of the shaft, pulling her body away from his reach, as if his skin were acid. Her eyes flash up at him from the gloom. Horror. Absolute, pure horror. Not at the death awaiting her, but at him. At the thought of being touched by a common executioner. Her body is sacred. It belongs to Vesta. Even now, in the dirt, she is consecrated ground. To let him touch her would be to validate their lie. She rejects his help. She rejects their pity. She turns her face back to the darkness and descends the final steps alone, wrapping her dignity around her like armor. She steps off the ladder, and her feet touch the floor of the tomb. The dry dust puffs up around her ankles. She is standing in her own grave, and she has never looked more like a queen. The wooden rungs are the only thing connecting her to the year 91 CE. They are the only thing connecting her to the sun, to the air that moves, to the concept of hope. From the bottom of the shaft, looking up, the ladder must look like a stairway to Olympus, steep, narrow, but leading to the light. But then, the silhouette of the carnifex blocks out the sun. He does not speak. There is no final pronouncement of the sentence, no reading of the charges. All of that was for the crowd. What happens now is strictly mechanical. He grips the side rails of the ladder. You can hear the friction before you see the movement. The heavy timber drags against the stone lip of the opening. It is a slow, grinding vibration that travels down the wood and hums in the floor beneath her feet. She watches the bottom of the ladder lift from the dirt. Inch by inch, the wood recedes. It scrapes against the rough masonry of the shaft walls, dislodging pebbles and dust that rain down on her upturned face. She does not blink. She watches the rungs disappear one by one. The first rung, the second, the third. With each foot it rises. The distance between her and the world expands, not linearly, but exponentially. When the bottom of the ladder clears the opening and is hauled out completely, the severance is absolute. The umbilical cord has been cut. Now, there is only the ceiling. The opening is 14 feet above her head. It is no longer a doorway. It is a window into a world she is no longer permitted to inhabit. The square of light it admits is sharp, geometrical, and indifferent. It casts a beam that cuts through the stagnant air of the chamber, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the gloom. The only things moving in this stillness. The sounds of the surface begin to change. Without the ladder bridging the gap, the acoustics shift. The roar of Rome becomes distant, muffled like listening to a storm from the bottom of a well. The voices of the priests, the shuffle of sandals, the distant bark of a dog. They are all warping, bending as they travel down the stone throat of the dungeon. They sound like memories, rather than reality. She turns away from the light to look at her new kingdom. The room is small, barely enough to pace 3 steps. The air is already heavy, sitting still and cold, like water at the bottom of a pond. The walls are cut from tufa rock, damp to the touch, weeping moisture from the earth that presses in on all sides. And there, in the corner, are the gifts of the Emperor. A narrow couch, more of a stone bench, with a thin mattress, where she is expected to wait. A small table, and the food, that loaf of bread. It sits there on the table, crusty and brown, looking absurdly normal in this tomb. It is the cruelest object in the room. A knife would be mercy, poison would be charity. But bread? Bread is a promise of a future. Bread says, eat, digest, survive for another hour. It is a tool of torture, disguised as sustenance. Beside it, the pitcher of water and the small flask of milk. And finally, the oil lamp. It is burning with a steady orange flame, casting long, flickering shadows against the damp walls. The oil reservoir is full. They have given her light, but only enough to see her own imprisonment, only enough to watch the walls close in. Above her, the sounds of movement stop. The heavy footsteps of the executioner retreat from the edge. The whisper of the priests fades. For a moment, there is a pause in the universe. The crowd holds its breath. She holds hers. It is the quiet before the thunder. But the thunder that is coming is not made of sound. It is made of stone. The light from the shaft is the last thing she possesses. It is the last image of the sky, the last evidence that a sun exists. She stands in the center of the chamber, looking up, drinking in that square of blue as if it were oxygen, because she knows what comes next. She knows that the blue is about to be turned off. It begins as a shadow, biting into the edge of the light. Above the shaft, the heavy stone slab, the saxum, is being levered into position. It does not slide easily. You can hear the strain of the men pushing it, the grunts of effort that filter down from the world of the living. And then, the grinding starts, stone against stone. A geological scream that reverberates down the shaft, magnified by the acoustics of the tube, until it sounds like the earth itself is roaring. The square of blue sky, that perfect geometric promise of freedom, begins to shrink. It turns into a rectangle, then a narrow slit, then a thin line of blinding white. Cornelia stands directly beneath it. She does not move. She watches the eclipse of her own existence. In that final second, before the stone seats itself, a single beam of sunlight hits the dust motes around her face, illuminating her one last time. And then, the slam. The stone falls into its groove. The light is not just extinguished, it is amputated. The suddenness of it strikes the eyes like a physical blow. One moment, there is the world. The next, there is only the thick, suffocating blackness, broken only by the feeble, trembling orange glow of the single oil lamp in the corner. But the horror is not over. The sealing of the stone is only the first step. Above her, muffled now by the thick slab of rock, comes a new sound, a rhythmic, soft percussion. Thud, thud, thud. It is the sound of shovels. They are piling earth on top of the stone. They are filling the shaft. This is the crucial part of the ritual. It is not enough to lock her away. They must erase the entrance. They are leveling the ground, packing dirt into the hole until the Campus Sceleratus looks exactly as it did before. They are smoothing the surface so that no one can ever find the spot again. They are manufacturing amnesia. Inside the chamber, the air pressure seems to shift. With every spade of dirt thrown on top, the weight of the world above her increases. The acoustics of the room change instantly. The distant sounds of Rome, the birds, the wind, the faint murmur of the crowd are severed completely. The silence that descends is not the quiet of a library or a bedroom. It is a heavy, active silence. It presses against the eardrums. It is the silence of deep geological time. For the first time, she can hear the sound of her own biology. Her breath, ragged and shallow, sounds like a bellows in the small space. The blood rushing in her ears sounds like a distant ocean. The scratch of her wool tunic against the stone wall sounds like a landslide. The sensory deprivation has begun. Her world has been reduced from the vast Roman Empire to a cube of stale air measuring 6 feet by 6 feet. There is no east or west here. There is no morning or evening. There is only the lamp, the wall, and the waiting. She backs away from the center of the room, retreating until her back hits the cold dampness of the tufa wall. She slides down until she is sitting on the dirt floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. The reality of the live burial execution settles in. This is not a holding cell. There is no guard coming to check on her. There is no appeal process. The stone above her head will never move again. It will remain there for 1,000 years, long after her bones have turned to dust, long after Rome has fallen, long after the language she speaks is dead. She is already an artifact. She is a statue that breathes. The isolation is total. It is a vacuum that begins to suck the rationality right out of her mind. She looks at the lamp. The flame flickers, dancing on the wick. It is the only other living thing in the room, and it is eating her oxygen. Panic is not an emotion. It is a chemical weapon deployed by the body against itself. For the first few minutes in the dark, Cornelia likely sat in a state of catatonic shock, her mind simply refusing to process the data her eyes were sending it. But then, the biology takes over. The amygdala, that ancient reptile part of the brain responsible for survival, detects the confinement and pulls the emergency lever. Adrenaline floods her bloodstream. Her heart rate spikes from a resting beat to a hammering rhythm that shakes her ribcage. The rational mind. The mind that maintained her dignity on the ladder. The mind that smoothed her dress is violently shoved aside. She springs from the corner. She scrambles onto the narrow stone couch, the only elevation in the room, and reaches up. Her hands find the ceiling. It is rough, cold, and unyielding. She finds the seam where the great slab of stone meets the walls of the chamber. She pushes. It is a futile, animalistic gesture. Above that stone lies 6 feet of packed earth, and above that, the indifference of an entire city. But she pushes anyway. She pushes until the muscles in her shoulders scream, until the tendons in her neck stand out like cords. She grunts, a guttural sound of pure exertion, digging her sandals into the mattress, straining against the weight of the world. Her fingernails scratch uselessly against the tufa, tearing the skin, leaving bloody streaks on the rock that no one will ever see. When the stone does not move, not even a fraction of an inch, the scream comes. It starts low in the chest and rips its way out of her throat. In the open air of the forum, a scream disperses. It flies up to the gods. But here, in a box measuring 6 feet By 6 feet, sound behaves differently. The scream leaves her mouth and hits the wall instantly. It bounces back, amplified, distorted, crashing into her own ears with physical force. The acoustic feedback is deafening. She is screaming into a closed loop. The sound is thick, muddy, and terrifying. It sounds like a stranger is in the room with her. She stops, gasping for air, the echo dying instantly in the heavy dampness, leaving a ringing silence that is somehow louder than the noise. She drops from the couch, stumbling in the small space. She hits the wall, then spins around. The confinement is absolute. The claustrophobia sets in, a word she does not know, but a feeling that is universal. It is the primal terror of being buried. She runs her hands over the walls, searching for a crack, a weakness, a mistake in the masonry. Her fingers trace the damp, slimy surface of the cut stone. She finds nothing but solid geology. She falls to her knees at the wooden door, if there even is one, or perhaps just the seamless stone walls. She claws at the dirt floor, digging her fingers into the earth until they bleed, throwing handfuls of dust over her shoulder, like a dog trying to burrow under a fence. But beneath the dust is just more rock. The physical exertion burns through her oxygen reserves. She is panting now, heavy, ragged breaths that suck in the stagnant air. And with a heavy breathing comes the smell. The sensory profile of the tomb begins to sharpen. It smells of wet limestone, a mineral, chalky scent. It smells of the cheap oil burning in the lamp, a greasy, acrid odor that coats the back of the throat. And underneath that, the rising smell of her own terror, the metallic tang of sweat, and the pheromones of a creature in distress. The heat from the single flame, though small, has nowhere to dissipate. It begins to accumulate in the upper layers of the air, pressing down on her. She collapses back into the corner, her chest heaving, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The initial burst of adrenaline is fading, leaving behind a toxic residue of exhaustion and despair. She stares at the lamp. The flame is steady, indifferent to her panic. It burns perfectly upright because there is no draft. No air is moving in. No air is moving out. The physics of her situation crash down on her. Every breath she takes is a theft. She is stealing from her future self. Every time she inhales, she converts a precious liter of oxygen into carbon dioxide. She is the engine of her own suffocation. The realization forces her to cover her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle her breathing, trying to hoard the air. But the body demands its fuel. She gasps, her hand falling away. The trap is perfect. To live, she must breathe. By breathing, she dies. She draws her knees to her chest, curling into the fetal position, but her eyes never leave the lamp. It is a simple object, likely mass-produced in a potter's workshop in the Trastevere district. Terracotta, unglazed, rough to the touch, with a small handle and a spout where the linen wick protrudes. It is the kind of lamp a slave would use to light a kitchen, or a scholar to read a scroll. But in this chamber, it has been elevated to the status of a deity. It is the sun, the moon, and the stars. It is the only point of reference in a void of crushing blackness. Without it, the walls, the bed, the bread, and her own hands would cease to exist. But the lamp is also a thief. Cornelia watches the orange tongue of flame dance on the wick. It is beautiful, hypnotic, and deadly. Every second it burns, it is consuming the finite resource of the room. It is feeding on the same invisible ocean of air that she is. It is a competitor, a parasite. She knows the physics of fire. She has tended the eternal flame of Vesta for 30 years. She knows that fire breathes. She can almost see the convection currents, the invisible streams of oxygen being pulled into the flame, burned and spat out as heat and soot. The lamp is exhaling poison into her cage. A terrible choice begins to form in her mind, a choice that claws at the edges of her sanity. She could reach out. She could pinch the wick between her thumb and forefinger. A hiss, a wisp of smoke, and the competitor would be dead. She would save the oxygen. She might buy herself an extra hour, maybe 2, of life. The math is cold and logical. Extinguish the light. Extend the biological function. But then, the alternative hits her. Total darkness. Not the darkness of a moonless night, where your eyes adjust and find shapes in the gloom. This is subterranean darkness. Absolute. Heavy. A darkness so thick, it feels like a solid substance filling your mouth and nose. In that darkness, the boundaries of the room would vanish. She wouldn't know if the walls were 6 feet away or 6 miles. She wouldn't know if she was alone. The silence would become a canvas for her mind to paint its worst nightmares upon. The Furies, the ghosts of the ancestors, the demons of the underworld. Without the anchor of visual reality, her mind would shatter long before her lungs failed. So she pulls her hand back. She cannot do it. She chooses the light. She chooses to share her air with the fire, because the psychological torture of the dark is more terrifying than the physical torture of suffocation. She strikes a bargain with the lamp. I will let you kill me faster if you promise not to leave me alone. She watches the oil level in the reservoir. It is a clock, a liquid countdown. The priests filled it, but did they fill it to the brim? Or did they pour just enough for 12 hours, maybe 20? She stares at the meniscus of the olive oil, trying to gauge the rate of consumption. It drops, imperceptibly. Time in the tomb has lost its linear quality. On the surface, time is measured by the movement of the sun, the changing of the guard, the chime of bells. Here, time is measured by the descent of that golden liquid. The shadows cast by the lamp are hard and sharp. They project her silhouette against the stone wall, a distorted, hulking shape that mimics her movements. When she rocks back and forth, the shadow rocks. When she trembles, the shadow shivers. It looks like a second person in the room, mocking her. She tries to focus on the flame, to meditate as she did in the temple. She tries to recite the prayers to Vesta, the archaic Latin verses she learned as a child. Vesta, Mater. Vesta, Mother. But the words taste like ash in her mouth. The goddess is not here. The fire she tended for 3 decades was the heart of Rome. This fire is just a chemical reaction in a pot of cheap oil. The sacred has become the profane. The protector has become the executioner. And she is just a woman watching her life burn away, drop by drop. The first thing to die is not the body, it is the clock. On the surface, time is a physical structure. It is built of shadows, moving across a sundial, the changing of the guard at the Castra Praetoria, the rhythmic clanging of temple bells. But here, 12 feet down, time has no architecture. It dissolves into a grey, fluid soup. Hours stretch into eons, then snap back into seconds. Cornelia tries to count. She tries to impose the rigid schedule of the Temple of Vesta onto the void. Prima Vigilia, Secunda Vigilia. She attempts to measure the silence in units of prayer, but without the friction of the world, the mind loses its grip on duration. This is the specific, calculated cruelty of the Paucis Sob buried alive, Vestal virgin. It is not just an execution, it is an experiment in psychological isolation. Modern neurologists know what happens to the human brain when you remove the Zeitgebers, the time givers. Without the cycle of light and dark, the circadian rhythm unspools. The brain, starved of external data, begins to panic. It enters a state of hypervigilance, scanning the silence for a threat that isn't there, amplifying the sound of a heartbeat until it sounds like a war drum. If you search the archives for ancient Roman punishments, you will find spectacle. You will find men torn apart by lions in the Colosseum, or slaves crucified along the Appian Way, punishments designed to be seen, to terrify the mob. But that me, Campus Sceleratus, is different. It was designed to be invisible. It anticipates the modern understanding of sensory deprivation. The Romans understood intuitively what we now prove in labs, that if you lock a human being in a box with no stimulus, the mind will eventually begin to eat itself. Cornelia feels the edges of her reality softening. She stares at the wall, and the rough texture of the tufa seems to ripple, like skin breathing. She looks at her hands, and they seem alien, too large or too small. This is the prisoner's cinema, the brain's desperate attempt to create visual input where there is none. She starts to question her own memory. Did she really unhook her dress on the ladder? Did the crowd really stay silent? Or has she been here for years, dreaming of a life where she was once a priestess? The past feels like a story she heard about someone else. She tries to anchor herself with the only task remaining. The waiting. But waiting for what? There is no event horizon. There is no sunrise coming to break the fast. There is only the slow, chemical transition from biology to chemistry. The air is getting heavier. It feels thicker in the throat, harder to pull into the lungs. This is the carbon dioxide. Building up, the invisible tide rising in the room. It brings with it a strange lethargy, a fog that wraps around the brain. Her thoughts, which were sharp and panicked an hour ago, are becoming slurry. The terror is still there, but it is becoming distant, muffled by the gas. She finds herself staring at the grain of the stone for an eternity, lost in a trance of pure existence. She is no longer Cornelia. She is just a consciousness trapped in a dying animal, floating in a jar of stone. The body is a traitor. Even in the face of inevitable annihilation, it demands to be fed. Cornelia has been sitting in the damp chill for hours, perhaps half a day, and the adrenaline that initially suppressed her appetite has burned off, leaving a hollow, cramping void in her stomach. She looks at the table. The loaf of bread sits there, indifferent and mocking. It is a round loaf, scored into sections, panis quadratus, baked to a hard darkness that would keep it edible for days. Beside it, the flask of milk has formed a skin on top, a pale, wrinkled layer of cream separating from the liquid. This food is the ultimate manifestation of Roman cruelty. It is not a mercy. It is a torturous paradox designed by legal scholars to absolve the state of guilt. If they threw her in here with nothing, she would die of thirst in 3 days. That would be murder. But by providing bread and water, they shift the timeline. They grant her the choice to survive. It allows the pontiffs to sleep at night, telling themselves that Vesta has been given a chance to save her servant. If Cornelia dies, it is because the food ran out, or because she chose not to eat. It is a bureaucratic technicality that prolongs her suffering from days into a week of slow, agonizing decay. She reaches out. Her hand shakes, not just from fear, but from the drop in blood sugar. She touches the crust. It is rough, cool, and solid. The sensory input is shocking in the deprivation of the tomb. The smell of the wheat, faint and stale, triggers a violent salivary response. Her jaw aches with the desire to chew. It is a physiological compulsion that overrides the logic of her situation. Her brain knows that calories are useless here. There is no energy to be expended, no future to fuel. But her stomach does not know the concept of a death sentence. It only knows that it is empty. She breaks off a piece. The sound of the crust cracking is loud in the silence, like a bone snapping. She puts the crumb in her mouth. It is dry, sucking the moisture from her tongue, turning into a gritty paste. She swallows. The sensation of the food traveling down her throat is nauseatingly intimate. It feels like a betrayal. By eating, she is collaborating with her executioners. She is agreeing to play by their rules. She is purchasing a few more hours of consciousness in this stone box. And the milk. Lack. The substance of life, of mothers, of beginnings. To place it in a tomb is a perversion of symbols. She uncorks the flask. The smell is slightly sour, the heat of the lamp having already begun to turn it. She drinks. The liquid coats her throat, soothing the rawness from her earlier screams. It provides a momentary flash of relief, a dopamine hit that feels like hope. But hope is the most dangerous thing in the room. The nutrients hit her bloodstream, and for a moment her mind clears. The lethargy lifts, and that is the cruelty. The food wakes her up. It pulls her back from the edge of the dissociation she was slipping into. It sharpens her senses again. It makes her acutely aware of the hardness of the floor, the dampness of the air, the flickering of the dying lamp. It refuels her capacity for terror. By feeding her, they have ensured that she will be fully awake for the end. She looks at the remaining bread with hatred. It is fuel for a machine that has no purpose but to suffer. She wants to smash the flask against the wall, to trample the bread into the dirt. But she doesn't. She sets the flask down gently. She brushes the crumbs from her lap. Because the instinct to live is a disease that cannot be cured, even when the cure is right in front of her. She saves the rest. She hoards the poison that keeps her alive. The true executioner has finally arrived. It is not the hunger which gnaws at her stomach with a dull ache. It is not the thirst. It is the invisible exhaust of her own existence. Cornelia has been breathing in this sealed stone cube for perhaps 20 hours. She has inhaled the crisp, dry air of the Roman autumn and exhaled warm, moist carbon dioxide. In the open world, that gas dissipates into the atmosphere, fed to the trees and the wind. But here, physics is a cage. The carbon dioxide has nowhere to go. It hits the stone walls and settles. Being heavier than oxygen, it begins to pool at the bottom of the chamber, rising like an invisible floodwater. She notices the change, not in her lungs, but in her head. It starts as a pressure behind the eyes, a dull, rhythmic thumping that synchronizes with her heartbeat. Then it tightens. It feels as though a leather strap is being cinched around her temples, twisted by a merciless hand. This is the carbon dioxide headache, a medical agony specific to suffocation. Her blood vessels are dilating, swelling inside the fixed cavity of her skull, trying desperately to deliver oxygen that is no longer there. The pain is blinding. It makes the light of the lamp flare and streak in her vision. She presses the heels of her hands into her eye sockets, trying to push the pain back, but it is internal. It is the chemistry of her own blood turning against her. She tries to take a deep breath to clear her head. And this is where the panic turns primal. She pulls air into her lungs, deep, heaving gulps, but it feels empty. It has no nourishment. This is air hunger. Her diaphragm spasms, forcing her chest to heave violently, but the satisfaction of a full breath never comes. The sensors in her brainstem are screaming that she is suffocating, driving her respiration rate up faster and faster. She is panting now, a shallow, desperate rhythm that sounds like a dog dying in the heat. But panting only makes it worse. It produces more CO2. She is caught in a metabolic death spiral. The symptoms of hypercapnia, carbon dioxide toxicity, begin to cascade through her system. The acid level in her blood rises. A sour, metallic taste floods her mouth, like she has been sucking on a copper coin. Her stomach churns, violently rejecting the bread she ate earlier. She retches, dry and painful spasms that tear at her abdominal muscles, but there is nothing to expel but bile and fear. Her skin, clammy with sweat, feels incredibly hot, then freezing cold. The temperature regulatory system of her body is failing. She crawls away from the corner, driven by the instinct that the air might be better elsewhere. She drags herself across the dirt floor, her limbs feeling heavy and uncoordinated, as if she is moving through water. She reaches the center of the room, directly under the sealed shaft. She stands up, swaying, reaching her hands toward the ceiling, toward the memory of the sky. She thinks that if she can just get higher, she will find the good air. But the invisible gas is everywhere. It wraps around her throat like a phantom hand. The pressure on her chest is immense, a crushing weight that makes every inhale a conscious, agonizing battle against physics. She collapses back onto the stone couch. Her heart is hammering against her ribs. Tachycardia, induced by the toxicity. It beats so hard she can see her tunic jumping with the rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. It is the only sound left in the universe. The silence of the tomb has been replaced by the roar of her own dying physiology. She claws at the collar of her grey dress, tearing the fabric, trying to free her throat, trying to open a passageway that is already open. It is not her throat that is closed. It is the air itself that has broken. The lamp in the corner is dimming now. The flame has turned from a bright yellow to a sickly, transparent blue. It is starving, just like her. The fire is dying of the exact same poison. They are suffocating together in the dark. And as the pain in her head reaches a crescendo, she realizes that the bread and water were a lie. They didn't bury her to starve. They buried her to drown in the dry air. The boundary between the stone room and the spirit world dissolves. It starts with a sound, not the ringing in her ears, that high-pitched, screaming frequency of dying nerve endings, but something lower. A hum? It sounds like the distant chanting of the pontiffs, Te, Vesta, Queso. The words are clear, melodic, rhythmic. She lifts her head from the couch, straining to hear. Have they returned? Have the priests realized their mistake? Is Domitian standing at the sealed shaft, weeping for his crime, ordering the stone to be lifted? She crawls toward the sound, but as she moves, the chanting shifts. It changes pitch. It warps into the laughter of children, the children she was forbidden to have. Then it twists again, becoming the crackle of a great fire, the fire of the temple. She turns her head and sees the wall of the tomb is no longer made of tufa. It is made of white marble. The columns of the atrium Vestae rise up around her, shimmering in the heat. She is back in the forum. The air is sweet with incense, not stale with poison. She stands up, her legs no longer heavy, her chest no longer tight. She reaches out to tend the sacred fire, her hand moving through the damp air of the tomb, grasping at phantom logs. This is the delirium. The brain, flooded with carbon dioxide and starved of oxygen, has stopped processing reality and started projecting memory. It is a protective mechanism, a final act of mercy from a dying organ. The prisoner's cinema has become a fully immersive theatre. The shadows cast by the dying lamp detach themselves from the stones. They elongate, twisting into human shapes. They are the manes, the spirits of the ancestors. They crowd into the 6-foot chamber, passing through the walls as if they were mist. There is the Vestal Maxima who trained her, looking at her with stern disappointment. There is her father, who gave her away at age 6, turning his back on her again. Cornelia speaks to them. Her voice is a croak, a dry rasp that barely leaves her throat, but in her mind, she is shouting. She pleads her case to the shadows. She explains about the dress, about the innocence, about the plot. "I am chaste," she screams, at the damp corner of the room. "Look at my hands! Look at the flame!" She points to the oil lamp. But the lamp is not a lamp anymore. In the distortion of her vision, the blue, sputtering flame has become the eye of a god. It is watching her, judging her. Then the fear returns, spiking through the hallucination. The figure in the corner is not her father. It is the executioner. He is here. He has found a way in. She scrambles back, pressing herself into the dirt, covering her face. She feels his hands on her, cold, heavy hands grabbing her ankles. She kicks out, her sandals scraping against the empty floor. There is no one there. The sensation is tactile hallucination, the misfiring of the parietal lobe. Her own skin is betraying her, creating the sensation of touch, where there is only the cold air. She starts to tear at her clothes. The grey tunic feels like it is made of fire. It is burning her skin. She rips the fabric at the shoulder, exposing her collarbone to the damp chill, but she feels searing heat. She is burning up. The fever of toxicity is raging. She is the sacrifice now. She is the wood upon the altar. She laughs, a broken, wheezing sound that echoes strangely in the small box. It is funny. It is terribly, hysterically funny. They buried her to protect the fire, but they put the fire inside her. She is burning from the inside out. The room spins, the ceiling descends, the floor tilts. She is sliding down a great slope, falling into the underworld, and the voices of the choir are getting louder, deafening, drowning out the sound of her own heart. She closes her eyes to shut them out, but they are inside her eyelids. There is no escape. The madness is the only thing that is real. The madness does not last forever. The brain has a final mercy, a shut-down sequence that pulls the consciousness away from the terror. The screaming voices in her head begin to recede, fading like crowd dispersing after a show. leaving behind a profound, ringing emptiness. The heat that was consuming her skin evaporates, replaced by a numbness that starts in her fingertips and toes and creeps slowly inward. She stops, fighting the air. She stops tearing at her tunic. She simply sinks. She is lying on the dirt floor now, her cheek pressed against the cool, packed earth. It feels familiar. It feels like a mother's hand. From this vantage point, she watches the final act of the drama. The oil lamp, her companion and her killer, is losing its battle. The blue flame, which had been dancing violently moments ago, shrinks to a tiny, trembling bead of light. It pulses once, twice, and then, without a sound, it vanishes. The darkness that follows is instantaneous and absolute. It is not the darkness of night. It is the darkness of the womb and the darkness of the grave. But with the darkness comes the smell. The wick, starved of oxygen, sends up a thin ribbon of smoke. The scent of extinguished oil, acrid, sulphurous, and final, drifts across the small room. It is the smell of a temple at closing time. It is the smell of an ending. And strangely, the pain is gone. The crushing headache, the burning lungs, the nausea, it all dissolves into a heavy, grey fog. This is the final stage of carbon dioxide poisoning, narcosis. The gas that was torturing her is now anesthetizing her. It acts like a heavy blanket pulled over the mind, muffling the fear, slowing the thoughts to a glacial pace. She feels heavy, impossibly heavy, as if she is sinking through the floor, down through the strata of the earth, past the roots of the trees, down into the deep, quiet stone beneath Rome. She curls her legs up toward her chest. It is an instinct, older than Rome, older than the gods. The fetal position, the body trying to remember where it came from before it returns to where it is going. Her breathing changes. It is no longer the ragged, desperate panting of air hunger. It becomes slow, shallow, irregular. There are long pauses between breaths, where the silence of the tomb reigns supreme. Inhale. Silence. Exhale. Silence. The pauses get longer. The body is forgetting how to live. Her eyes are open, staring into the pitch black, but she sees nothing. No hallucinations, no gods, just the peace of the void. Her heart, which had been racing like a trapped bird, slows down. Thump, thump, thump. It beats with a heavy, deliberate sluggishness. It is tired. It has kept the rhythm of her life for 36 years. It beat when she was taken from her mother. It beat when she first lit the sacred fire. It beat when the stone slabs slammed shut. Now it asks for permission to stop. She does not think of Domitian. She does not think of the injustice. Her final thought is not a word, but a sensation. The coolness of the earth against her cheek. The earth is Vesta. Vesta is not a statue. She is the ground itself. Cornelia realizes, in the dim, fading spark of her consciousness, that she has not been exiled. She has been returned. She is entering the body of the goddess. The lungs take one last, small sip of the poisonous air. The diaphragm relaxes and does not contract again. The air leaves her lips in a long, silent sigh that disturbs the dust on the floor. The heart gives one final, lazy contraction, pushing the last of the oxygenated blood to a brain that is already asleep. Then it stops. The machinery halts. The heat begins to fade. In the absolute darkness, 12 feet beneath the Porta Collina, Cornelia ceases to be a prisoner. She becomes geology. The silence of the tomb is now complete. Let us strip away the poetry. let us step out of the hallucination and look at this room through the cold, hard lens of forensic science. If a team of archaeologists were to locate the Campus Sceleratus today, using ground-penetrating radar to find a void beneath the modern streets of Rome, and if they were to bore a hole through that stone slab, what would they find? They would not find a sleeping beauty. They would find a crime scene preserved in amber. The discipline of taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay, tells us exactly what happens in a sealed limestone chamber. Without scavengers, without wind, without rain, the decomposition is slow and grotesque. The first thing the flashlight beam would catch is the position of the remains. In a normal Roman burial, the body is laid out supine, arms crossed, dignified. But here, the skeletal arrangement would scream of the final moments. The spine would be curved, the knees pulled up tight to the ribcage. This is not a ritual pose. It is a biological recoil. It is the body trying to conserve heat and protect the vital organs as the systems shut down. But look closer. Zoom in on the phalanges, the finger bones. In the dust surrounding the hand, we would likely find the decomposed remnants of the fingernails. And embedded in that dust, we would find grit, tufa particles. If we analysed the walls of the chamber, particularly around the sealed entrance or the corners, we would find the corresponding evidence, deep vertical grooves cut into the soft stone. These are not tool marks. They are the desperate, frantic signatures of human nails trying to dig through solid rock. We might even find microscopic fragments of keratin wedged into the pores of the stone, thousands of years later. It is forensic proof that the acceptance came only after a period of animalistic terror. And what of the room itself? The gifts of the emperor. The loaf of bread would be gone, reduced to a pile of carbonized dust by centuries of slow oxidation, or perhaps preserved as a desiccated, rock-hard lump, still bearing the teeth marks of a woman who ate to survive a death sentence. The oil lamp would be sitting exactly where she watched it die. Inside the reservoir, chemical analysis would reveal the residue of low-grade olive oil, burnt down to the very last drop. It confirms the timeline. She didn't die in the dark. She watched the light die first. The air quality inside the sealed chamber would still be different from the outside world. If we sampled the pocket of gas trapped in the tomb before opening it fully, we would find an elevated level of carbon dioxide, isotopically linked to human respiration. Her breath is still in there. The very gas that killed her is trapped in the stone matrix, a ghost of the hypercapnia that stopped her heart. This is what makes the punishment of the Vestal so insidious. It leaves a permanent record of suffering. A beheading is over in a second. A burning destroys the evidence. But a live burial creates a time capsule of agony. The skeleton tells us she didn't just die. She was hunted down by chemistry. The medical examiner would look at the lack of trauma on the bones, no broken neck, no crushed skull, and conclude that the cause of death was environmental asphyxiation. But we know the truth. The cause of death was the law. The skeleton is just the debris left behind by a machine designed to crush a human spirit without leaving a mark on the skin. But while Cornelia's bones were turning to dust in the silence of the Campus Sceleratus, what happened to the man who put her there? Did the gods strike him down? Did Vesta send a fire to consume his palace? No. For 5 years, the sun continued to rise over Rome. Domitian continued to sit in the Flavian palace, eating grapes, signing death warrants, and sleeping in the bed of his niece. The city did not collapse. The legions did not falter. The pollution of the Vestal Virgin, which he claimed threatened the empire, turned out to be nothing more than a political superstition. The world was indifferent to her sacrifice. However, the wheel of history turns, and it grinds exceedingly fine. 5 years later, in September of 96 CE, the violence that Domitian had inflicted on others finally came home. It didn't come from the gods. It came from his own household. A conspiracy of his wife, his chamberlains, and his guards. They cornered him in his bedroom. The eternal censor, the man who claimed to be a living god, was not given the dignity of a ritual execution. He was butchered like a pig. He was stabbed in the groin. A fitting, bloody irony for a man whose reign was defined by sexual hypocrisy. He died screaming, grappling with his assassins on the floor, his blood soaking into the expensive rugs. And here is the final, a bitter twist. Upon his death, the Senate, the same men who had silently nodded when he condemned Cornelia, erupted in joy. They didn't just kill him. They voted for Damnatio Memoriae, condemnation of memory. It was the exact same punishment he had inflicted on Cornelia. They ordered his statues to be smashed, his name to be chiseled off every arch and temple, his coins to be melted down. They tried to erase him from history. But look at the difference. Domitian's erasure was loud. It was a public spectacle of destruction. Historians wrote volumes about his cruelty. Suetonius detailed his perversions. Tacitus analysed his tyranny. Even in his erasure, he remained the protagonist of the story. He is remembered as a monster, but he is remembered. Cornelia? Her erasure was total. She didn't get a statue to be smashed. She didn't get a biography. She got a hole in the ground. The only reason we know her name is because Pliny mentioned her as a footnote in a letter about something else. She is a ghost, in the margins of a tyrant's story. There was no retrial, no posthumous pardon. The Roman legal system never admitted it was wrong. To this day, in the official records of the pontiffs, she is listed as guilty. The lie outlived the liar. This is the cold reality of power that the history books often gloss over. We like to believe that truth ultimately triumphs, that innocence is its own defense. But the tomb of the Vestal teaches us the opposite. It teaches us that if you have enough power, you can bury the truth 12 feet deep, pile dirt on top of it, and the world will walk over it without stumbling. Cornelia died, waiting for a justice that never arrived. She died for a crime she didn't commit, to save the reputation of a man who committed it daily. The only thing she managed to save was the thread of her tunic on the ladder. That small, defiant gesture of dignity is the only victory she ever won, and it wasn't enough to save her life. The Campus Sceleratus is gone. If you go to Rome today, you can walk near the Piazza della Repubblica, where the Colline Gate once stood. You will find traffic, tourists eating gelato, and the noise of a modern European capital. The hole has been filled. The ladder is gone. The physical machinery of live burial has been dismantled by the progress of civilization. We tell ourselves that we are better than them. We tell ourselves that we have evolved past the barbarism of burying women alive to appease angry gods. But have we? Or have we simply upgraded the technology of the tomb? We no longer use tufa stone and earth to seal people away. We use algorithms, We use the block button. We use the collective silence of the crowd. The mechanism of the live burial was never really about the dirt. It was about the social death. It was about taking a human being who was woven into the fabric of the community and surgically removing them. It was about making them invisible while they were still breathing. And that mechanism is more efficient today than Domitian could have ever dreamed. Look at the structure of a modern cancellation. It follows the exact ritual of the Vestal punishment. First, the accusation. It often stems from a violation of a sacred social code, our modern version of Incestum. It doesn't need to be proven in a court of law. It only needs to be felt by the crowd. Then comes the stripping. We strip the target of their status, their job, their reputation. We tear away the vitae of their social standing. Then comes the parade. We drag them through the digital streets of Twitter and TikTok. The crowd lines up, not to throw stones, but to throw comments. Every angry emoji, every quote tweet is a clod of dirt thrown into the pit. We feel virtuous doing it. We tell ourselves we are protecting the sanctity of our community, just as the Romans believed they were protecting the sanctity of Vesta. And then, the sealing of the stone. The account is suspended. The friends stop calling. The emails stop coming. The target is still alive, sitting in their apartment, breathing, eating, sleeping. But they have been removed from the shared reality. They speak, but the algorithm ensures no one hears. They post, but the shadow ban acts like the thick walls of the tomb. They are screaming into a closed loop, the psychological isolation that hits them is identical to what Cornelia felt in the dark. The air hunger is now a hunger for human connection. The panic is the same. The descent into the fetal position of depression is the same. We have democratized the role of the executioner. In Rome, only the Pontifex Maximus had the authority to drop the stone. Today, we all hold a shovel. When you join a pile-on against a stranger, you don't know. Based on evidence you haven't verified, you are throwing a spade of dirt. When you see someone being destroyed and you choose to scroll past because you don't want to get infected by the controversy, you are the lictor turning his face away to avoid pollution. We are building thousands of tiny, invisible tombs every day, burying people alive in shame and silence. And then we go to dinner and talk about how enlightened we are. The scariest part is not that we do it. The scariest part is that we enjoy it. There is a dark, primal satisfaction in seeing someone else fall into the pit. It confirms that we are still on the surface. It confirms that we are the good ones. Domitian knew this. He knew that the best way to unite a fractured empire was to give them a witch to hunt. We haven't changed. We have just swapped the Colleen gate for the glowing rectangle in your hand. The lamp is no longer an oil flame dying in the corner. It is the blue light of your screen, illuminating the destruction of a stranger while you watch, safe in the dark. So tonight, when the audio ends and the silence rushes back into your room, do not be too quick to fill it. Sit with it for a moment. Let the darkness press against you. And in that quiet, try to hear the faint, scratching sound of a fingernail against stone. It is the sound of the truth, trying to claw its way out of the oubliette. We cannot save Cornelia. We cannot pull the ladder back up. The physics of the past are immutable, but we can do something that Domitian failed to do. We can refuse to let the darkness win. History is not merely a record of what happened. It is a battleground over memory. Every time we tell the story of the victim instead of the victor, we are tunneling into the tomb. Every time we look at the uncomfortable, jagged edges of the past, instead of the polished marble statues, we are passing a cup of water to a ghost. This channel exists for that purpose. We are not here to recite dates and names. We are here to exhume the bodies that the Empire tried to hide. We are here to light a lamp in the Campus Sceleratus of human history. But a lamp needs oil. It needs a keeper. This is your oath. If you felt the cold of that stone room today, if you felt the weight of the injustice, do not walk away in silence. Do not be the crowd that watches the spectacle and then goes to dinner. Make your mark. Hit the subscribe button. Not for the algorithm, but as a digital votive offering. Think of it as lighting a flame that the wind cannot blow out. Leave a comment below. Speak her name, Cornelia, so that the search engines, the modern gods of memory, are forced to acknowledge she existed. We are BBM Historical Review. We do not look away. We do not let the fire go out. And until we meet again in the archives of the deep past, keep your eyes open. The dark is only terrifying if you face it alone.